Hi, this is Pamela Groppe Art, and today we are going to paint a tiger pumpkin. So this was in a previous video, this green pumpkin, but today we're going to work on this pumpkin, and it's got a little bit different because you can see part of the back shoulders, and that is important. Today I'm using pure orange. This is vintage white. These are all folk art colors, and this is Pueblo to give the orange a bit of shadowing in certain areas. Now the tiger pumpkin is a little bit different because the ribs are a different color, not just shadowed, and there's some like speckling on it a little bit. So I'm going to start with the mostly the vintage white. And I don't know, you probably can see the lines I chalked on here to follow. And then I'm going to go into the pure orange. And I'm going to add the Pueblo from time to time. Let's go ahead and add a little bit now. And I'm going to start with the back. Well, I don't know, they're kind of narrow, so I might use a smaller brush for those. So maybe I'll just start here. I'm starting on the chisel edge. There we go. And I'm going to follow the line. I want this to be the rib. And there's where the rib is. You notice I did a C-stroke, started on the edge, and then had it land down there. And same over here. I'm going to follow the rib. We getting this? Okay. So let's go back into the orange. And this one, I need to fill in with the creamy white there a little bit more, but that's done. I'm just going to do it with the corner of my brush. I'm just going to add that way. Now the orange part is, the ribbing or whatever you want to call it, is a bit wider on these than on your average pumpkin where you're just shadowing. Now we're not trying to be perfect, we're just kind of go for an effect, and we're going to fix the bottom where it's overlapping there. We're getting in the basic design of the tiger pumpkin. Now this center part is mostly creamy white, so I'm going to switch brushes or rinse out my brush and go do that. I want to do these back ribs. So I'm going to go with a smaller brush so I can have a little more control over the tight areas. So I'm going to set this brush aside and grab a number 12 flat. Is this a number 12 flat? Yes. Dampening it, touch it on a paper towel. You see me in other videos. I'm going into a vintage white and then adding the orange, touch of that Pueblo, and I'm going to go along that ribbing, and I'm just going to fill in with the creamy white. Like I said, we're not worried about perfection. You can go back over it to add in more orange, more white. I had a little bit of orange left on my brush, but the undercoat doesn't matter. I'll go over it with more of the vintage white later for a second coat and make it more white. So right now I'm just kind of filling in these areas that needed more of the vintage white. Now there is a rib there, I need to do some orange. So that's white there. This is where the stem's going to be. Now the stem's going to kind of obscure some of the back part, so don't sweat that. So now we need to let this dry, and then we can come in and add the second coat. But you can kind of see the outline of where everything is at, where your ribs are at, etc. So let's let it dry and we can come in and do the second coat. So the first coat of our tiger pumpkin has dried. Now back here I got a little bit too much orange mixed in, so I kind of lost my edges, but I'm just going to go over it with the vintage white only on my brush, and that will then make it where you can really distinguish where those others are at. And I'm not real sweating it. The stem, like I said, is going to come out and obscure part of it, but I did want to create more white here. Now the back here, the veining or the orange part is not quite as thick, so it'll be very narrow back there. So let's just get this in here. And I'll go along the outline. Now pumpkins are not perfectly symmetrical, so don't worry if it's a little lumpy bumpy in some areas. Okay, there we've got that. And this needed some more in here. Creamy white. I like this vintage white. It doesn't have too much yellow in it. Some off-whites have a lot of yellow. Okay. Now looking at my picture of my pumpkin, some of the orange can have a lot of dots and they're not just perfectly solid. So I'm going to get a little creative with my brush strokes after a bit so that we can create that interest too. All right, so that's a little still wet, and that's good. We want that. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to pick up some of the orange and the vintage white, and I'm going to double load my brush. Going to get some of that Pueblo, and then I'm just going to go along some of these edges. And you notice how it fades into the white. That is exactly what I wanted. I wanted it to. Now remember over here they narrow, so I'm turning my brush so that the orange is very narrow there. And we can kind of wiggle along so that that's not just perfectly straight. You don't have to. If you want them straight, you go ahead and make them straight. I'm adding a little bit of Pueblo with my orange, my pure orange, and it gives it a little bit more depth on that side. If you want to just shadow one side, that's fine. Come back, load only the pure orange to do this other side. Now we can also just kind of wiggle the brush to give it that look of the tiger pumpkins, how they're kind of lumpy, bumpy as they go along. This one I don't like. I'm going to fix it. More white, less orange. There we go. Just work with it until you get what you're going for without muddying it up. Okay, I'm liking that. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to restate these veins or parts. There. Now let's see if I can put some dots with the corner of my brush, just kind of I don't know if I'm going to like this. I can go over it if I don't. I'm looking at my picture, and right along the edges it kind of has these little lumpy bumps. So I'm trying to be loose. Without getting too crazy. And let's kind of make this one, yeah, I still got orange on there. And sometimes at first it may not be pleasing, and then you're thinking, what in the world? And then it comes together after it dries. And I see some of them have little parts of the white in the veining, so that might help give it a little more realism, even though I don't go for realism, you know that. But just kind of dance your brush around. So we'll leave it. We can fix it later. And on my photograph, it's showing a green stem. I'm debating that. We can try green, and if I don't like it, I can go back over it with burnt umber. It will cover it for the most part. So I still have my number 12 flat. I have rinsed it out in the water and touched it on my towel, and now I have the thicket over here on my palette. Loading my brush in the thicket. This is still wet, so I probably should dry it, but let's kind of go for it. And this one kind of goes like this. Doesn't kind of, it does go like this. And then it has like a stubby little end. All right, and I can see, if you see through it, I'll let it dry so I can go over it with a second coat and make it more opaque. Now this one does not have the little tendrils going off into it. It just shows it, and it's probably because this part is obscuring it, like this is sink down in it, and I didn't do that well enough. So let's see how we can, once that gets dry, it's not dry yet, so bear in mind that. It shows this part coming up and over. So you see I drug the green in, and that kind of sunk it down in there. And also this is kind of shadowed in here. We haven't gotten a lot into shadowing, but I will take a touch of the burnt umber, add it to the vintage white. Oh, my burnt umber is all dried up. Well, I got a little bit. So you notice that. I have it in my brush, a little burnt umber. I'm loading it into the vintage white. Need to get more burnt umber. Well, I'm not finding it, people. So I touched barely. There we go. Okay, I've got some burnt umber. I found some. And I'm just going to go in here with that burnt umber mixed with the vintage white and just kind of put a little shadow in there for the stem. Yeah, so then that's plenty. Less is more. So there is that. And let me, another thing you can do, and this is totally optional, is fly speck it. That'll give it some added dimension. Now I see a lot of oranges showing through on the vintage white. You can go over it with another coat when you let it dry. Now I'm looking for a fan brush or something to do some fly specking with. Let's see if I could do it with this brush. So I'm going to go into the Pueblo, and I'm getting it kind of watery, not too watery. I know that was kind of blurry, and then I'm going to carefully, I got it a little too watery, I think. Let me get it a little thicker. Now usually with a toothbrush or whatever, it's a little bit easier, but I'm just going to kind of flick specks on it. And I think I like that better than trying to tap them on with a liner or yeah, I'm liking that. Okay, so there is that part of the tiger pumpkin. Let me rinse out my brushes here. And I'm going to go ahead and dry the stem, and I'm going to come back and we're going to restate that. Okay, let's take a look at our pumpkin. Now you notice these two ribs are just way too close together. So it's mostly dry. Yeah, mostly dry. There's a little bit of dampness to it. So I'm going in straight vintage white on my brush, and I'm just going to fill that in. And back here, I don't want the rib to be the outside color. I want it to dive into that. So we're just going to touch up that. The vintage white is not perfectly opaque, so it shows through a little bit, but that's fine. And there we have that. So up here on my photograph, it's showing this a little bit more, like covering that like this. I got that little bit of that green in there. Now see how that orange is showing through, but I can come back later after that's dried. And so there. Okay, that is showing that. This will also get another coat. While I'm waiting for that to dry, I'll go ahead and restate or do the second coat on the stem. So let me get the green in my brush. I'm just going to follow basically the same outline. And if you want to add a highlight, or even if you want to add some darkening, but I'm just going to highlight. I'm going to mix some of the vintage white with my green and just bring in some streaks and maybe a little divot just to give it some detail. So there we have mostly our tiger pumpkin, and I'm going to dry that right there so you can see me do the second coat, and we'll see how that works. I'm just looking at it now, just double checking it. Okay, one moment. Let's see if it's ready for its second coat. Could be still a little bit wet. I'm just a little impatient. And that's doing good. I just go in where I think I got a little crazy with things and touch it up. All right, we are good. I'm trying to find my picture again. Okay, the ribs do kind of come up into this a little further. Am I making you crazy yet? Okay, we are all good. So there you have your pumpkin. I kind of want this to kind of go down like it's a, there, that's what I wanted. And there you have your tiger pumpkin. I am so glad you joined me for this video. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and over on my website at that's my other one, at PamelaGroppe.com, where I have lots of free painting tutorials, lessons, tips and tricks, and other kind of fun stuff. I'll see you in the next video.